We live streaming? Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Board of Ed Curriculum meeting, subcommittee meeting. Because we have a slightly heavier topic, heavier agenda. Sorry, I'm still jet lagged. Bear with me. I barely slept again. I'm just going to go quickly. I would like to have a hard stop at 10 o'clock because I have a doctor's appointment. So as quickly as we can. And if Corey and Dr. De Silva, if it's okay with you, we can go through the topics. We can talk about humanities. You can share whatever it is, and then we can ask the committee if they have questions. If not, we move on to topic B and then to topic C, if that works for everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So the first agenda item is humanities. Do you want to lead us, Corey or Dr.
Sure.
Silva?
Absolutely. So good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Today we have some updates for you. This has been the first full year with these positions, the Director of Elementary and the 612 supervisors for math, science, and humanities. And I would like you today to hear the updates across their departments, because there's a lot of work and a lot of traction going on in terms of curriculum. So we wanted to make sure that we were sharing with the board and with the public. So we're going to hear the humanities K-12 update, math K-12 update, and then an overall update around curriculum leadership and how we're supporting our school-based curriculum leaders as they move forward into the super important summer, which is where a lot of that curriculum happens because teachers are teaching. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Annie Tucci to lead us off with the humanities update.
Morning, everybody. So we have our K-12 writing study update, and Linda Johnson and I have been working with many of our teachers across the district and visiting classrooms. So Linda, why don't you share a little bit about what's happening at elementary so we can talk forward with what's happening up at the upper schools.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'll start off by talking a little bit about our professional learning plan at the elementary level and how that is connected to inter-district visitations. So in all of our elementary schools this year, we share a common focus in one area, because there are many areas for professional learning. One of those areas is writing, and we concentrated our efforts in grades 3 through 5 this school year. Each school did develop their own goals on what that professional learning would look like. And those goals really are developed based upon feedback that our teachers give us around student work, right? It's looking at student performance, looking at work samples, and determining what our students need, and then how we can develop a professional learning plan to support our teachers in implementing those practices around student needs. So for example, we might have how to teach small group instruction to write about development in a writing piece, or there might be professional learning around how to conduct an effective writing conference with a student to really differentiate the instruction in that one-to-one setting during a conference. Our building teams did finish up, or they're in the process of finishing up their professional learning plans this spring. And next steps will be to come together as a team. The principals, Corey and I, will meet, we'll reflect on our process, our goals from this school year. We'll look at what worked well, maybe what some of the challenges were, and then we'll start to set goals for next year. And as Annie mentioned, we did have inter-district visitations. You may remember when we reported to the board this winter that we did have actually a fabulous, very successful visitation in one of our elementary schools, where we had folks from the middle school and the high school visit a 5th grade writing class, and it was during their literary essay unit. So our teachers had an opportunity to see the teaching and learning taking place within a 5th grade lesson, and then talk before and after the lesson around what they saw, the planning, what goes into that instruction, talk about what, the similarities and differences between a 5th grade, 6th grade setting, and then of course giving teachers an opportunity to ask questions, which is always an important part of our process. And then Annie, in a minute or so, will talk about the experience that we've had at the secondary level, and I'm going to finish up one more round this month. On a separate note, I did want to give you a quick update on our phonemic awareness implementation this year. As you may remember, we did adopt and implement a new resource across all 6 elementary schools, Hegarty, that does provide that structured instruction around phonemic awareness, which is, being able to hear those individual sounds in spoken words, and also the understanding that spoken words are made up of those individual sounds called phonemes. And I'd like to make a connection between this instruction and writing. So I'm happy to share one of many huge successes that are happening in our primary grades. Recently, I was in a kindergarten classroom where I had an opportunity to read some of our kindergarten writers' how-to books. And the teacher and I, actually the teacher pointed it out, how our students are able to transfer their learning from these phonemic awareness lessons to their writing. And that's the goal. One of the many goals of our early literacy programs is that we can teach, for example, phonemic awareness, and then students can transfer it into their writing. So that was just a big win, a big success that I know myself, our teachers are very excited about and wanted to share with you this morning. And now I'll turn it over to Annie, who will talk about secondary.
So as Linda mentioned, we engaged back in January visiting our 5th grade classrooms. And in March, we took the same team and we went to go visit an 8th grade writing lesson with at CERMS. And the team met, we engaged with context for what the unit was and expectations for the setup of understanding like what unit they were in, and our students were engaged in research during this time. So it was a bit of a different type of writing, right? We went to visit literary writing and in 5th grade. And then, what was interesting is that we actually got to see how instruction changed for introductions. And that was a really great through line, because in our 5th grade lesson, students were focusing on how to expand their introduction. And in 8th grade, they were looking at some different strategies as well in their writing to support their opening of their essays and their research. This at the next week, I believe. I can't believe it's already the middle of May next week. We will be visiting grade 11 writing lesson up at RHS, and the team will be heading up there. We've been able to invite and maintain our crew that's been visiting all of our classrooms, and invite a few others along the way as we head up into the upper grades. Some of this work is going to support and help us set goals for professional learning for next year, supporting writing conferences, and what does that look like at the secondary and high school level with growing our writers K through 12. And what is the life of a writer here at RPS is a great question that we are finding all these great examples and all the genres that our students are engaged in across our district. And then it's going to help us give to set measurable and specific goals for assessment, for rubric alignment, conversations, and how to support all of our students. And then just a few other updates is I know that we're going to go through our line here, so I'm going to go into the other few topics for the humanities updates. Some of the things that happen outside of school, there are great celebrations that happen. Our students take what they learn in school and they really do engage in a lot of academic pieces outside of their school day. And they are reaching these achievements, and I really wish that I could, but I can't share the name of the student yet for the Profiles Encourage Honorable Mention essay contest, because it was supposed to go public last night and it has not yet. So I will send an update on that, but just a little bit of information. There are over 2,400 entries, and to get an honorable mention nationally is the top 10 student in that. And so it's a great achievement for our students, and or for our student who has gotten an honorable mention. The essay is a creative piece responding to how to have courage in politics. And it's from the JFK Library, and they set this up to help engage our students to write about a politician from 1917 to today. So I will have more information to follow. I was really hoping it would go public last night. Updates on History Day. Our students at CERMS, they engaged in History Day, and some students, we had many students win a regional contest. So I just want to highlight some of those students. So we had in the junior individual website category, Madeline McCartan, Joseph Valesco, and Sebastian Utomo. They took first, second, and third place in that division. And then our junior individual exhibit, Michelle Basker took third place, and our junior individual documentary, Jaden Castanga, took third place. So we have students who are engaging not only in essay writing and reading, but they are engaging in historical thinking skills, reasoning processes, research, and then they're turning them into these documentaries, exhibits. They have to go and speak at the contest. So they're really taking what they're learning in school and using that outside of school as well. So it's just a really exciting moment for our students. Model UN also is going on. So I just wanted to highlight some of those experiences that really do showcase what great opportunities that we're providing for our students. And lastly, Battle of Ridgefield. What a wonderful weekend it was. Oh, like my social studies heart sang. On Friday, we were at ERMS and the Connecticut 5th Regiment, and the reenactors presented stations over at the Jesse Lee Church. And our students in 8th grade got to experience different parts of our battles in terms of what it was like to be in an encampment or a naval in the Navy, or if you could, be strong enough to be part of the military at that time, because there were age requirements, but they didn't really have, people lied all the time about their age to get into it. So, and just about what the experience was like for during that time. The reenactors were incredible. And then to close the day, they had an assembly at school, and it was a really great experience. So kudos to all of the work that was put into what an exciting weekend. Any questions? I figure we highlight some of the great stuff that's going on outside of school. Rachel. Oh, sorry, Tina.
I just have a comment. This curricula team is just phenomenal. From a vantage point, the communication is cohesive and brilliant. I really do call you guys brilliant. I mean, it's just wonderful. And I love that decisions are being made based on teacher feedback. And I love the connection across the grades and how you're following their progress. I think that's really collecting data, so to speak, in education at times, right? Seeing that real life measurable goal right there in the classroom. So I really appreciated that conversation. And I think it also helps us as a board support initiatives that move our kids forward and make the experience better and better. So I really thank you for that.
Thank you.
Sean?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, we've talked about some of the high flyers that are putting all of these things together. Are we seeing an increase in interventions in the elementary from the last couple of years of COVID, or how's that through line looking?
Linda, do you want to follow up on that, or would you like me to do that?
I'm happy to talk a little bit about it, and of course, Corey, add on. So, we have been paying attention to our student needs, whether it is, Sean, enrichment areas, intervention areas, students in between. And yes, there is a need for intervention in both literacy and mathematics at our elementary schools. Our building-based teams through our MTSS process have been working very hard, paying very close attention to the data that we're collecting on our students, and then making decisions around goals, whether they're specific targeted goals where interventions are delivered by our classroom teacher, or if the goals are then moved toward intervention by classroom teacher and either a math specialist or a literacy specialist. So, and those goals range, right? And then the services that we're providing to our students have a great range as well. And it really does depend on the student need.
But is the need increasing, decreasing, staying the same? What are we seeing? What's the dashboard look like?
I can answer that. So we have seen an increase. In addition, what is happening that was not as typical in the past is that we may see a trend across an entire class. So instead of, or across an entire grade level. So instead of, you can't intervene, send all those students into intervention. So what we've done in some cases is, for instance, an entire first grade may need to go back and reteach some elements of foundational reading that, based on our triennial data review, our students needed as a big group. So that is different than what we're used to seeing. We're used to having students who have needs all over the place, but what we're seeing now in some cases is, as we're looking at whole class or whole grade data, we are making adjustments to curriculum, and perhaps going back because it's a need with so many of the students. Mm-hmm. And then specifically around writing, it is true that both writing and mathematics suffered a lot when we were not in school. One of the things about writing practice, which I'm sure that everyone knows who writes for work, is the more you write, the better you write. And it's very hard for parents at home to maintain the kind of structures and stamina that teachers are able to maintain in school. So we have been really, really pushing, which is part of the reason we did start this writing study this year, to get our students back into that stamina and the habits around writing. So that's another reason that became a big focus this year, because we knew that our students needed to get back into all those skills and strategies, along with just those practices of stamina. So yes, we're seeing more. It looks different because there's sometimes large groups. And yes, writing is an area that we're continuing to push.
Okay.
Just wanted to add something though to your like a little bit of the root to your question, Sean, which is, are we seeing more students? It's in some ways, it's a little bit hard to know for sure, because one of the things that we noticed and the team is working hard on, and one of the things that you've heard me say even last night, is that we're working hard to provide assured experiences for kids. And so when we say that, what that actually means is, let's just say in our elementary schools across 6 schools, right? They may all have been teaching using a phonics resource, but if that phonics resource was outlined differently across whichever ones they were using, it would be hard to know for sure, which kids are struggling based on a criteria at a given point in time, because this group of kids may have just not been taught yet. They're going to get taught that, but it's later in their scope and sequence versus this group of kids. And so now that we're moving towards a systematic phonics program, and we now have a systematic phonemic awareness program, I think being able to see a common data point across time is going to be far cleaner. Again, it's not that kids weren't getting support, they absolutely were, but what that support looked like in terms of timing was different. The other piece that the team is not talking about today, but is something that they're working very hard on, and in some ways directly and indirectly connected with special education, is, what does the intervention look like early? What does that systematic work look like early? And are we able to mitigate with children so that the gap in their learning doesn't grow in the same way that perhaps may have been in the past? And so even though it seems like lingo, it is an assured experience, it's not really. So knowing that across our 6 schools, this is how we teach phonemic awareness and the ability to hear sounds and words. Across our 6 schools, this is how we teach phonics. Across our 6 schools, this is how we teach writing. Across our 6 schools, this is how we teach mathematics. And generally speaking, this is the scope and sequence. So it doesn't mean that a teacher, like Corey said, isn't going to halt in first grade and say, we need to reteach that whole chapter because the majority of our kids don't know it. That's going to happen. And so that group of kids may fall behind, at least initially, and then hopefully catch up later. But at minimum, we'll be able to see that pattern across our schools over time. And it seems like it's a small deal, but it's a big deal. And it's not that easy of a task for the team. I know they're working hard with our elementary principals, the data warehouse that, we put into the budget this past year. In fact, we just moved it out of the general budget and put it into a grant because of the reductions in the budget. So that piece of data, really, really important. Systematicness is really, really important. And so I know that Corey and Linda worked hard to understand what numbers of kids we had in support, but it's not quite comparing apples to apples. I just want to be transparent.
So as a civilian who doesn't speak edubabble very well, which I've said on more than one occasion, what I think I heard you say is we have a structured, consistent curriculum across all the schools with intervention and supports as early as we can identify.
We will have next year.
Right. Got it. Okay. And then one other question. I think this one's more geared towards Annie. I spent a lot of time on Main Street this weekend, and I did have a few people ask me, what are we doing to braid the reenactment and history of Ridgefield into our social studies and our history curriculum? Instead of doing it every 5 years, it is something that should make its way into every year and say, hey, we've got real history here. Let's take advantage of that.
Sure. So we do embed our Ridgefield history, especially with our grade 8 curriculum when we have our first unit with the colonial era. Our students engage with primary, secondary resources, and I am beginning some partnerships with our Ridgefield Historical Society with the work that's being done there, curating resources here about members of our community that have contributed. So
great.
We are working on it. And I do know that our history does get embedded, especially with our government and politics courses up at the high school. We include many opportunities for our seniors to participate in Board of Ed elections, where we have our board members go up to the high school. We also have our town registrars, the registrar of voters go in and discuss how to register with our students. And if they are 18, they can register right then. So we do have a lot of connections with our Ridgefield community and growing.
Thank you.
I can just add on very briefly. I'm going to just be aware of the time. There is history in our integrated studies curriculum at the elementary levels in various grade levels. I'll just give you two quick examples. In grade 4, our students study the American Revolution. Grade 3, we take a look at scientists and inventors in Connecticut and the work that they've done to bring us to, to different stages of inventions that we have in our current society. So, developmentally appropriate, aligned to our social studies framework, does lead up to the work and learning that we do in our middle school and our high school.
Any other questions?
Thanks. Great.
Okay, moving on.
All right. So Jeff, can you lead us off with the K-12 mathematics update?
Absolutely. So there's two items that we're going to talk about this morning. So the first is an update on our math placement process at the middle school. And then it's going to be an introduction to a high school math pathways CAT that is really being kicked off this spring. So to start us off with math placement, I think I just want to begin the conversation with making sure everyone realizes that our goal is to make sure that we are having students in a math course that they are ready for. And we recognize that readiness comes at different stages for different students. Some students might be ready for acceleration in 5th grade. Some might be ready for in middle school, which is why we allow flexibility. And sometimes students aren't ready until they get to high school. And so we've allowed options for students to be able to accelerate at that point. So we recognize that, students are students. So we have a process in place, but we do allow flexibility within our process to make sure that students are taking the courses in which they are ready for. This process also is a year-long process, right? So it's not just something we do right now. It really is something that we monitor student progress throughout the year. We collect data points throughout the year. So really to kick us off, what I think would be good is maybe Linda could give us a quick recap of where we've been this year. And then I'll continue on with where we are now and the next steps.
Happy to do that, Jeff. So yes, definitely a year-long process. And some of this may sound familiar to some of you from a presentation that we did this year at the Board of Education meeting. So I'll just talk briefly about the work that has been taking place throughout the school year as we are coming to the end of our placement process now, the next couple of weeks. So back in the fall, you may remember that Jeff and I, along with our district teams, really took the time to create a timeline for the implementation of a cohesive math placement process, beginning in 5th grade and all the way through our middle school and then eventually into 9th grade. So I'll highlight a couple of the components that are part of that timeline. We did take time in the fall to review the data that has been used in the past, right? So we really looked at past practices. How has math placement decisions been made in the past? What data sources were used? What criteria was used to establish placement into the different courses? And then from there, we developed our own protocols and processes to administer and score assessments to ensure that we are being consistent across our 6 elementary schools and our 2 middle schools. And of course, we naturally paid very close attention to students who have IEPs, students who have 504 plans, and making sure that protocols are set up to align with their individual plans. From there, we did provide some professional learning sessions with our teachers, not only members of our district math teams, our math specialists, but also our classroom teachers, our math teachers. And that was super valuable because we were able to gain their insights from their experiences in the past with placement, what they're seeing currently with our students. And we were able to collect some really good feedback around the process that we were putting in place. And then we're able to provide them with some training around those protocols, processes. So again, there was a cohesive, consistent approach to the assessments, scoring, so on and so forth. From there, we really put a plan in place to make sure that we were very communicative, transparent with our parents, our community members, you included. So it started out all the way back in November during parent-teacher conferences. We asked our classroom teachers to highlight the math placement process that would be coming up this school year during a conference with parents. And then we also did follow up with an information letter to parents that sort of mimicked what they heard about during the parent-teacher conference in the fall. We sent that letter out in January, sort of reminding parents, again, this is the process, this is what's coming up. And then from there, we did present to you, the Board of Education, and we held a parent information session in February, explaining the process, again, all the way from 5th grade up through our middle school. And that session was videotaped, it's recorded, and it's still available on our RPS curriculum website, our YouTube channel, so that parents can still see that information session. And when we send out our placement letters in the next couple of weeks, which is what Jeff is going to talk about next, we'll make sure that we highlight that resource so that parents know that they can go back and look at that as a reference. And then I think it's also important to note that all along the way, Jeff and I have been working closely with our building administrators and our math specialists, right? Like they're the building-based team. And we've been able to collect feedback from them. They've been a part of the decision-making process. And another important part to highlight is that we've been really taking a look at developing our curriculum consistently across the schools, following a similar pacing, so that we know that our students did have experiences with the curriculum, the concepts, the skills that are strategies that students would need to be successful on the tasks, the data sources that we used to establish a criteria. That's just an important piece to notice. And then, of course, now after putting all these steps in place, we've come to the point where we're ready to review the data and start reaching a criteria for the different math courses. And this is where I'll turn it over to Jeff, where he can talk a little bit about those next steps.
Absolutely. Thanks, Linda. And with this process, I know Linda mentioned kind of all the people that we worked very closely with through this process. I just want to also emphasize that our middle school math teachers were also included in this process. Literally from the start of the year, they offered valuable insights into their experiences, into what they found on the unit assessments in terms of their teacher recommendation along the practices. So there was a lot of good information we also got from our classroom teachers, in addition to our math specialists and our administrators. So in terms of the specific data, I know we've shared this before, but I think it's worth repeating that the data that we looked at really included information from the beginning of the year. We wanted it to be sure that we included common assessment data, so something that all of our grade level students, or at the middle school, everyone in a particular course took the same assessment. So that included our unit assessments across 5, 6, and 7. That included critical thinking tasks, whether that was done in, for example, in 6th grade as part of the unit assessment, or in 5th grade and 7th grade, they were additional tasks outside of those unit assessments. Those pieces were meant to gauge kind of the non-routine style of questions, so that students could apply what they've learned in the classroom in more non-routine ways. The other piece of the criteria that we've looked at is what we call a journey to independence score. That is really the teacher's ability to look at a student and decide, based on the mathematical practices, where a student is ready in terms of the development of those practices. I mean, those practices are really K-12, so there is a continuum, there is a growth along those practices. We don't expect, perfection out of any of our students, even at the 12th grade level. So what it is, it's an insight into kind of what's happening on a daily basis in the classroom. And then in addition, we do look at the NWEA. It's a standardized measure. It's one of many. And then what we do is we looked at all this information, and it's key to point out that we do not expect for any of our placement decisions for students to have to meet the criteria for every single one of the items. We recognize that students could have an off day on a unit assessment. Maybe the NWEA was not their day that day. Maybe the concept application, maybe it was the way the style of question was asked and they didn't quite understand that particular moment. So for every single one of our course placement decisions, including into our most accelerated double acceleration of algebra in 7th grade, students do not need to meet every single one of the criteria. So I just really want to emphasize that. So the process that Linda and I really took part in is we looked at all of our data. For NWEA, we looked at historical information, right? We had a real strong history of success based on specific cutoff scores for each of our courses in the middle school. So we really relied on that knowledge base, because it has shown success throughout the years. Now, for our in-house assessments, our common assessments, what we did is we did a similar process in every grade level, where we looked at, not to get too statistical on everyone, but we looked at our mean and median, we looked at our standard deviation, and we looked at the general spread of data. And from there, we were able to really clearly come up with a cut score for each of our individual indicators. And then from that point, we were then able to match each of our students based on those criteria. So that was our general process in terms of our initial, I like to call it an initial go at placing students into these courses, because once that process is done, we're now actually in the middle of an audit process. It's equally important that what we do on a spreadsheet gets brought to the teachers, to the administrators, and to the building level, because what is currently happening over the next week is our building principals at all 6 elementary schools and our 2 middle schools, our math specialists at the elementary level, our grade level teachers at the middle school, along with myself, and Linda is involved in that process as well, is we're having meetings to look through every single student. And we're making the determination as a team whether this protocol, this process, really put every student in the right math course. And it's engaging in those conversations that if there's a concern that maybe this process did not put a student into the right course, we can bring additional information. So one thing about this process that was really important is that we've collected data through about January, February, but obviously we're in May. Right. So the reason that it kind of gives that little bit of wiggle room is that in this audit process, we have new, more recent sources of data that we can bring to the table. So for some cases, it might be a spring NWEA score, more recent unit assessments, because as I mentioned before, kids grow at different rates. Right. So it's possible that maybe early indicators maybe didn't qualify them. But if we look at more recent indicators, it would qualify them for maybe a higher course or a higher level. So that's really one of the key parts of the audit process, is to go through every individual student, just to be fully transparent as well, because I think that's important. Because we looked at all these different indicators, it's possible that a student maybe didn't take a unit assessment for some reason. Maybe they moved into the district partway through the year. So we do have a number of students that are missing some of these data sources. So that's another reason for this audit process to dig in deeper to those individual students. And as a team with the building leader and the math teachers to really make that, that placement choice. So when we do this criteria, we have students that absolutely qualify for particular courses. And then we have a level underneath. We like to call those they almost met the criteria, but they were just a little short. And we recognize that that's possible. So what we also created is a watch list. This watch list is part of students that would be waiver eligible. And to clarify a little bit about what that process means, waiver eligible just means that a student maybe didn't quite hit each of the indicators, but because they were so close, families have the option to waive into the higher level. Now, it's not universal. They still have to meet criteria for the waiver. So it's not everyone is waiver eligible, but when we're creating these lists of students, we've got a list of students that absolutely, based on the qualifications, will meet the qualifications for a particular course. And then we've got those right on the cusp, right on the bubble students that we call the waiver list. And that gives parents the opportunities when placement letters go out, and the date is May 13th, right? That's kind of our next big point is May 13th. When those letters go out, parents will have the opportunity to see whether their student qualified for a particular course or qualified for the waiver. And if they qualify for the waiver, they're being invited to have a conversation with the school-based team so they can really dive more into the specific data points to see whether or not they want to put their student into a higher course or higher level. And that's what that process will undergo, but really between May 13th and May 27th. So we have a window of time where we're asking our building-based teams to have those meetings. Principals, Linda, myself, will all be included at some level within those meetings. So we really are trying to do a collective process, really across all different perspectives. The other point to really mention about this watch list, we talk about this being a year-long process because what we do with this watch list is we then carry that into next school year. So what that means is our next year's math teachers will be able to look at the students that maybe were right on the bubble. And we do this with all our students, but a very specific attention for these students to make sure that they're getting the necessary support, to make sure that they're in the right potential course, and that we can make adjustments in the fall, both moving up a level or moving down a level. And both have happened this year. I just want to make sure I say that publicly, that there is movement that happens within the fall. And again, that's really because of our watch list and our teachers' really close attention for the individual needs of those students. So again, that's kind of a recap of where we're at, how we came up with our criteria, and kind of some dates and next step for where this process goes. I'm thinking maybe before we jump into the high school math pathways, I suspect there might be questions. Unless Corey, you had anything you wanted to add? Okay.
Oh, no, you did it perfectly.
Okay.
Anyone has questions? Sean.
More of a statement than a question. I've been at this part of things for many, many years, guiding and calibrating my own kids' math pathways. And I think this is about the most transparent and descriptive I've ever heard it. And I think that little video clip needs to be mandatory viewing for all parents who are concerned about how their kid got placed into math. It was always a black box, and parents were always worried that this one test was going to ruin their entire life. I think it's a lot more thoughtful, and you've put together a very, as I said, very transparent methodology here. It's sound, it's scientific, it's easy to read, and everybody should hear this.
Agreed. Amy.
Hi, just wondering, for those parents, for those families who decide they get the waiver and they decide to go ahead with the more accelerated class, what happens when that ends up being maybe more than the student can handle? Is there a way for them to have an easy out? Does that happen immediately? Do they have to wait till the end of the semester? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the process it really includes the math teacher school administrator, counselor, and I've been brought in and many of those discussions as well to kind of talk with the teacher and look at the information, because that does happen, right? A student may, be in an accelerated course and it doesn't go as well as they were hoping. And I always like to say, in isolation, I think our students can do amazing things, but there's a lot of different courses that students are taking. There's extracurriculars. There's a lot that can be on students' plates. So if there is a concern about a particular level, especially being too difficult, that's a conversation with the classroom teacher. And if we can make that schedule change at the middle school, and it can be rather rapidly. They don't have to wait until the end of a quarter. It can be done mid-quarter. So that flexibility is absolutely there. And to me, it's all about communication, right? Putting the partnership with the families, the student, the teacher, and the school-based administration. So it's all really communicate, reach out to families or reach out to teachers if there's any concerns. That would be my main message to everyone.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm just going to add, and I hate again, I'm going to say this again, I'm following Sean, but I've been part of these conversations, especially middle school math placement, for years now. And it's always been almost like a hard stop. Parents were always concerned. They felt that if the kid wasn't in the highest course, they were never going to succeed, quote unquote, in math and get to the highest levels. This is so transparent. This makes so much sense. And I love that there's flexibility. And you're talking about it. The watch list really makes it that there are some kids, as you've said, and I think I've said it too, all kids progress and grow differently. There was a time when we used to use fourth grade scores, and maybe we still do. I'm not talking about that. The fact is, you're looking at everything completely. You're looking at a child and you're taking teacher input and you're seeing how a child grows, because my own child was 9 years old when he was in fourth grade. So to think of those placement processes for middle school make no sense. So I really appreciate the work you're doing. To echo Sean's point, this is the most transparent it has been, and you're looking at a child, every child. You're not looking at as like, cut and dried, hard stop, cannot move back and forth. And this is anecdotal, and maybe I may be wrong, but I also know at the high school, if the kids have found, they may have been in the highest courses, and if they found it tough, parents have talked to guidance counselors and teachers, children have dropped down levels, because eventually children learn the capacity they can do, and it may not be the highest math course or whatever. So I do want to acknowledge that I think it's been great that we work on this. I'm glad we're putting students' needs first, and also very glad that the teachers are front and center involved in it, because nobody knows a child's growth much, much better than a teacher. They're not just a data, they're just not a number. There's so much more. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And you really made a nice transition then to what Jeff is going to talk about next, because I think what you can hear from Linda and Jeff's description is that while we have great data and great sources, and we're looking across the year, we're also looking at children who progress and grow in different ways. And I think that you can see that in the last year and a half, we've done a lot of work from elementary school into middle school. So what Jeff is going to share next is the work that he's continuing to do and really leading as we transition students into the high school. Because as you said, Tina, some students really get into math in high school, and we want to make sure that we have multiple pathways for our students, that those are clear and evident to their parents and to them, because you could start algebra in high school, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay in just one track. So Jeff, why don't you share what you're working on with your team?
Absolutely. So this next item, we're really following a similar process that has already been done through what we call the CAT process, right? The Collaborative Action Team process. So that same structure is what we're utilizing here in the high school as we talk about the development of high school math pathways. So I do want to make it from the very beginning. I know when I bring up the idea of math pathways, some people might be thinking about those middle school courses, and we've gone back and forth over the last 10 years of pathways and course names. I just want to really make it clear that we're talking about our high school courses, and we're talking about the math experiences that students have as they take these high school level courses. So our Math Path CAT is really a group of educators coming together to analyze what our students' experience is in math class. You may be familiar with right, the Common Core standards, the state standards. Those were really adopted almost, the work we engaged was almost a decade ago. So that is really why this time is really necessary for us to look at this work again, because the world today is very different than the world 10 years ago. So that's one of the main drivers of this work. There's also been a lot of observations, suggestions throughout the course of this year and last year in relation to things related to our special education population and related to what geometry looks like for students, in terms of standard progression, in terms of whether calculus, a path for all the calculus is necessary. There's all these questions that have been swirling around. So this process allows us to put it all together in one collaborative action team. So I'm going to give a brief overview because I'm cognizant of time. But our membership on this team spans a large group of people. It includes high school teachers across multiple courses and across multiple levels. It does include special education teachers, those that have co-taught in many of our math classes, as well as those that are teaching a self-contained math course. So what that means is we have a very small number of students in the building their course is called Math 1, 2, 3. So it just means that they're not in our RISE program. That's a different population, but it's a very, very small number of students that maybe are not ready for high school level standard mathematics. Maybe they're learning standards at the 4th or 5th grade level, as an example. So that's part of that process as well, because they're students that are going to have a pathway. We also are including voices at our middle school, since we do have high school versions of our courses at both of our middle schools. We have middle school representation for both of those, as well as science. So we do have a science representative, because what we do in math will absolutely affect the experiences that students will have in science, specifically chemistry and physics is where I'm thinking. There's a strong connection. So we actually have a science representative on the team. And this process, this timeline, is really a 4-year process. This is not something we can just make a quick change. What next year is really our study and action plan year. So throughout the course of next year, we are going to be studying different pathways around a very specific goal. And the goal of this committee is to be able to develop varied pathways through a collection of courses for all of our students that were based on either college, career, citizenship. Right. And that's what's important, grounded in all of those. So kind of some of our sub goals in that is to make sure that we're developing kind of what are our essential concepts and priority standards that all students, regardless of pathway, they need to understand about mathematics. And really starting with the end in mind, right? Thinking about our experience of where students are going after graduation. To develop a series of courses that would be developed for a STEM type of student, someone going into a more STEM field, someone going into maybe a non-STEM field, and seeing how we might be able to link those to careers and potential college majors. We're really looking at developing clear curriculum for our students, like I mentioned in that very self-contained math course sequence. It's small in number, but it's important that we develop a series of experiences for students that some may remain in that self-contained pathway, but we also want to have the opportunity that maybe throughout high school, a student might be able to learn algebra. They might be ready at that point to learn Algebra 1, which opens up a lot of doors in terms of different colleges and majors and things like that. So we're going to do a deep dive into that. And really what we're trying to do is reimagining a one-size-fits-all approach for all students. So as of right now, the way our courses are, like as an example, we have geometry. We have leveled courses of geometry, honors, college prep, and then we have at our college prep level and intermediate. But what we're really trying to do is, the way it's designed is all students are kind of on that path to calculus in terms of what we're teaching our students. And the reality is we're trying to broaden that perspective for students, especially our kind of non-STEM pathway, and see what we could do differently. And part of that is going to be looking at what other states are doing, looking at what other schools are doing in terms of the collection of courses, the types of courses they're developing, the experiences for kids. And then kind of that last goal is to broaden the types of courses we might be able to offer to our upperclassmen. An example of that, again, we're going to study and come up with an action plan, but I know data science as an example, right? We have statistics, but data science, I mean, it's a very important, it's an important area for a lot of our kids. There's a lot of job opportunities in that particular area. So there's things like that where we really need to dive into and develop experiences for kids when they get to those upper grades. And then, so that's all next year. That's all our study year. And then following that will really be a 3-year implementation rollout to write curriculum over the summer, pilot the courses throughout the year, collect feedback throughout the time, make any adjustments as needed. And then we'll be able to get through all of our really core courses over the next 3 years as part of that process. So that's really the initial introduction to this process. So there'll certainly be additional updates along the way, and we'll be sure to keep kind of the board updated on where we're at, what we're finding within our process. But this kind of gives you a glimpse at the work to come, specifically kicking off in the fall.
Anyone, questions? Thanks, Jeff. This sounds great. Especially, I know, again, I go back to the stress parents put themselves and the kids through, because if you're stuck in a pathways, you're just going to be stuck. And so kids take courses beyond sometimes what their capacity is. And sometimes they just need to be able, sometimes they just mature up in 11th grade and want all the math they can take. So thank you for doing that. It's great that we're talking and having conversations about that.
Thank you.
Moving on, no questions? Right, we'll move on.
Okay, so our last update on the 612 department leaders retreat that Jeff and Annie will be leading in a couple weeks.
So this is super exciting. So the purpose is for Jeff and I to bring our 612 departments together. So that way our department leaders have time to take a dive into the student learning from this year and the spring scores to see where our students are at, how they're moving up, and how we can use that information to inform goals for our departments. So the purpose is to engage in celebration and collaborative reflection of the whole year, so that way we can inform our department goals related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Some of the sessions will include a data dive into quantitative data, looking at student scores on NWA in the spring, PSAT scores, SAT scores are out for the spring. Looking at our world language teachers will be, our world language department leaders will be part of this work as well. So we'll be looking at their proficiency in Apple scores, curriculum-based assessments, and then also doing a dive into the qualitative nature of our learning experiences and what we've witnessed with our students. Learning walks, observations, conversations, department meetings, teacher experiences with our students in the classroom, and using that information to put together some very specific long-term goals and action steps for next year related to professional development. And with that information, what we will be doing is connecting with our building and our district level priorities. So that way, all of the work that our teachers are engaging in professional development wise is speaking to each other, right? So that way, department level, building level, and district level, that there is a clear through line as to the work that's being done based on our student needs. So we're very excited for this opportunity to bring everybody together, because we know in the past that it's been difficult to do. To put everybody in a room together, looking at student work, looking at data, and to have those collaborative roundtable discussions about their experiences as leaders, because part of Jeff and my position is also to help grow our department leaders as instructional leaders, right? And we want to make sure that we are having a shared philosophy too. So we're growing our team. So there's a lot of great work that's going to be happening that day. And from there, we will be working with our building admin to make sure everything is connected and well articulated and communicated to our teachers, before heading off into the summer so that they are well aware of how their year will begin.
Thank you.
I tried to do that as fast as I could.
You did. And Linda's doing similar work at the elementary
Yes.
level. So I just wanted to, just bring together what you just saw, which I think is such an amazing highlight of all the work that this team has been able to accomplish in their first year with their building-based leaders and with the administrators in our buildings. We all work in partnership. We all have a common goal to do what's best for our students. That's our why. That's why we're here. And I just think that this was such a great example of the need, why we needed these positions and why the depth and breadth of them is so important, and how much traction we've really gained in their short time here. So we're happy to take any final questions.
None? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I think this was amazing. It really helps. I hope parents watch it. And I'm going to keep spreading the word to watch this because it's so important, right? We are talking about this is all transparent. There's all information out there. And the more parents can educate themselves and learn about what's happening in our schools, it really helps the conversations and just, know what's happening in your child's school. And there are places and people you can reach out to if you have any concerns that include math, writing, whatever the case may be. So thank you all so much. This was really great. And, it's great coming back to. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.